one of Donald Trump's lawyers was making the rounds in the media, sort of responding to this and doing a little bit of defense for Trump, but also kind of like doing a little bit of defense for himself and the legal team. So first of all, he was asked if there are any regrets in not having Donald Trump testify in his own defense.
Why did Donald Trump not ultimately take the stand here?
Well, that's a very personal question to him and to me, honestly. And it's a very difficult question. Of course he wanted to testify, and I don't say that because that's what he has said. He wanted to get his story out. I think the judge had made some decisions before the trial or the day of the trial started about what would be allowed to be asked of him by the prosecutors if he took the stand. And some of those questions were really complicated to answer because there's still appeals going on, and so there's a lot of decision points that go into whether somebody testifies. Ultimately, it's his decision, and he listened to us, and he relied on our counsel, and he reached a decision that he thought was right, which I very much agreed with.
Yeah, that's part of that's a spin on the reason. The questions that are very difficult to answer. Yeah, because he's committed a lot of crimes and he could be asked about it. He's done a lot of terrible things and he could be asked about those. He has lived exactly the sort of life that you would not want to live if you were ever going to end up on the stand being asked about who you are and what you've done. I think that's largely it. Saying he wants to testify, sure, I guess he likes fighting. He didn't want to be anywhere near that stand. He was utterly terrified of the questions that they would ask him about his life, about the incident, about him as an operator of the Trump organization, about he mentioned the appeals, about E. Jean Carroll and about the other fraud case in New York. Hey, I'm glad you're here. Listen, in order for the Damage Report to keep on going, we need viewers like you to become a member on YouTube. Can you click the join button on YouTube today? Thank you. This is obviously the historic set of charges because they're felony criminal charges, but he's already gone down multiple times in courts in New York because he's a serial criminal. And before we discuss, I want to get to a little bit more of how Donald Trump had a direct impact on the defense. And it gets to sort of how they chose the jurors that eventually ended up convicting him.
Who ultimately was in charge of the defense strategy here? Was it you or was it Donald Trump?
It was both of us. If there's a lawyer that comes in and says that they're in charge of their defense strategy, they're not doing a service to their client. Every decision that we made as a team, and not just President Trump and myself, but the whole team.
Were you satisfied with jury selection? And was the former president involved in that in any way?
I mean, very much involved. He was right there with the whole team talking about the potential jurors. Look, was I satisfied? We put a motion in because we said we could not get a fair jury in Manhattan. And that's I'm not being disparaging to the jurors, man. They were great. They showed up on time every day. They were committed. They paid attention. But we're in a situation where we had a very limited number of people we could strike. And most of the folks, overwhelming number of folks, had a very strong opinion of President Trump, and it wasn't positive.
And maybe that has something to do with Donald Trump and what he's done. But yeah, to be clear, when you complain that the jury reached this verdict, as the right wing is doing, he helped pick it. Okay, now obviously, it's people in New York. Again, I know the idea that you get tried in the area where you committed the crimes is all of a sudden a mystery to the right, but he helped to choose these people. He made some decisions. He thought he had a strategy. He was proved to be wrong. And that goes to jury selection. That goes to him not testifying. That goes to them really not bringing forward more than 2 witnesses. Them really not putting forward an articulation of an actual defense rather than relying entirely on criticizing Michael Cohen. It gets to the fact that, and I listened to a great breakdown of this on the Daily earlier today, that very often in a defense like this, you will acknowledge the failings of your client. You will attempt to humanize them, be willing to give a couple of inches to get the jury on your side. But it's Trump, so they couldn't do that. Trump was not going to have Todd Blanche go before a jury and acknowledge that he'd done terrible things, but it doesn't rise to the level of a crime. In every one of these areas, his own personal failings, his own desperate needs hamstrung the ability of his defense to actually protect him. Brett, what do you think?
I mean, it sounds to me like Donald Trump was such a weak loser that he got pushed around by his lawyer who told him not to testify. Or Donald Trump is too afraid to testify. Or Donald Trump and his lawyer are Donald Trump's lying all the time. And even those pathological liars, no, you can't really do that in a court of law. And that's the boundary and the price of his political immortality. Once he gets into that room, once he crosses the great seal of the great state of New York, he is now susceptible to to dying politically. And he did. And this is where the rubber meets the road. This is all anyone has left. And no one, yes, there's a part of me that's like, yeah, it's hilarious. And I think everyone has that in them. Everyone who doesn't think this is hilarious and that Trump lost in this specific way, like they're lying to themselves. They're like, oh my God, protect my roll boy. No, it's hilarious. It's just like no one really actually wants this to be how America goes. Even the people who just got Trump convicted. And the last thing is his lawyer saying like, oh, there were a lot of people who were against Donald Trump. They had a lot of strong feelings about Donald Trump. I will remind you, only one of them needed to have strong feelings in support of Donald Trump.
Yep.
And he would be found not guilty. He got those kinds of breaks when it came to impeaching him. There were a bunch of lackeys who saw what was on the table and decided, no, I can go with my allegiances instead of my conscience. That was the Senate, and they get to do that. But in a court of law, people get to do whatever they want. But the jury actually followed the rules that keep the fabric of the justice system sewn together.
Yeah. For once, he didn't have a lackey.
Yeah.
And
he did have a lackey, and that lackey, just like Michael Cohen, and that person who gets their news from Truth Social turned on him because they were like, even I can't go along with this.
Members make a difference here at TYT. You help make the show happen, and we see you in the chat with your loyalty badge. Click the join button to become a member today.